Hello, everyone. Hope everyone's had a great day. Or, yeah, if you're just starting your day, then hope you have a great day ahead. Welcome to another episode of Narad News. So, today, what we are thinking is again, we'll just do one topic. I think this format works out the best even for me because as you guys all know, I still have full time employment. So yeah, it just works out that I don't have to look at like 4 or 5 different topics and then sort of go over each of them in detail. So I'm liking this format the best, but do let me know in the comments that if you want the daily dose format where we go over 4 or 5 news stories, but then dedicate a shorter amount of time to each of them, or do you want like maybe 3 stories in 30 minutes? Uh, yeah, share your thoughts please in the comments. What type of format do you like? I think for now I'll keep this one just because one, it's you can almost always find one topic to talk about on a daily basis, which is interesting enough, which is local enough to Canadians or even to British Columbians. Um, and it's also exciting. You can actually talk about it for half an hour or so. There's enough to unpack in these stories. And there's also and you can keep it varied. You don't have to get very repetitive on it. So yeah, so I guess for those of you who saw the thumbnail for today, we're gonna again touch upon a little bit on one aspect of the BC economy and the Canadian economy at large. um, and this kind of will touch upon what we discussed in the previous live, which was about making economics first again. And the theme of this talk is going to be very similar to that. But again, today we look at a different industry. So last time we looked at mining, which seems to be doing really well, but there are some issues with leaving the not so well off or not so well established prospectors out of the whole game just because there are too many delays with the permitting process. Today we'll talk about another industry, the lumber industry, where again we see partly it's suffering in Canada because of again permitting process. However, over here we cannot deny that the tariffs have actually hurt this industry probably more than any other industry till now. When we think about the tariffs, we have to always remember that right now, the US tariffs actually don't apply to most of the exports from Canada to the US because they are protected under CUSMA. If you're watching from the US, Americans call it the USMCA. And long story short, this is NAFTA 2.0. So this is the free trade agreement between US, Canada, and Mexico. And the Trump administration's tariffs actually don't apply to a lot of the goods and services that fall under this category. But again, lumber is not one of them. So in Canada, it has suffered because of these tariffs. So let me pull up the first article I have here, the main story that led me to want to sort of talk about this topic. Here we go. So this is Premier EB. He is the Premier of British Columbia. For anyone watching from India, premiers in Canada are basically chief ministers. And then anyone watching from the US, premiers in Canada are basically governors of states. They are politically equivalent. So there are no quick fixes. David Eby talks economic progress, but not for crippled forestry sector. Premier David Eby went all in at the Northern Resource Forum in Prince George this week, starting with a progress report on the commitments he made there in 2025. For those who don't know, Prince George is a small town in the interior of BC. This is nowhere near Greater Vancouver area. Prince George, Prince Rupert, Fort St. George, some of these are, the big towns of interior BC. So last year when I stood here, I made a clear commitment in a keynote address. I said our government would refocus on economic growth that would work with you in responsible resource development. I said that as times changed, we as a government would change too. To some extent, I would say this promise has been kept, right? The reason for that is we are seeing a little bit of a bounce back, right? We are seeing a little more economic activity. It's still not as great as it used to be in 2022, 2023 and whatnot, but we are seeing a little bit of an uptick, right? Especially when it comes to, trade deal with China. The federal government is also trying to do some sort of a trade negotiation with India. And then internally within Canada, we are seeing premiers, trying to come up with a way to have another gas pipeline. Pipeline projects are being, green lighted and etc. So we are seeing progress. Mining is also doing well, apart from the small group of people that we discussed last week. I don't want anyone to think that, okay, mining is not doing that great. It's actually picking up. I'm in support of that. But again, we need to even go further in sort of making economics first again. So lumber seems to be a little more affected because of two reasons. One, as I said, the tariffs. The second is, again, permitting process. So when we go down, one sec, guys. Okay, good to go. So lumber actually has seemed to taken a little bit of a hit. The most recent update from the government had the harvest going in the opposite direction from 30 million cubic units or cubic meters down to actually 29. So that's a little bit of a fall. EB did promote the promise of the government's forest landscape plans developed in partnership with First Nations, industry, and communities. When we do this work, the results are meaningful, said EB. He cited the landscape plan for Nimkish Valley near Port McNeill on northern Vancouver Island, the first of 15 such plans to be completed by the government. I want to actually take you guys to a quick chart. So here is a quick chart on BC softwood productions. Now this data is actually from Statistics Canada. So don't think that this is, taken from a blog post or something. This is about as official as it gets. What we are seeing, and just to call this out, right, that on the left axis, when you see those numbers, those are actually in thousands. So when you say 1,500, it's actually 1.5 million. And what they represent is cubic meters of lumber produced. Now, this data goes back as far back as Jan 2021 and all the way up to October 2025, although you don't really see that on the axis. But anyway, this is the most comprehensive 5-year data I could get, and this is pretty official as well. So we are seeing a clear decline in softwood production over the past 5 years. One thing is it's very volatile, but the second thing is that, okay, spruce, pine, and fir production is going down and is contributing to most of the downward trend that we see in the softwood production. In fact, the SPF production is actually slightly more downward sloping than the total production, and that's because the non-SPF is relatively flatter. Now, why is SPF so important? SPF is important because this is the wood that's used in home building. This is the wood that's used most commonly in production. Because other types of woods, they come with their own challenges. This one is very malleable. This one is very easy to form into products, essentially, right? So now softwood in general is comes from trees that actually do not go through seasonal patterns, right? They don't basically have a fall. Like, the leaves don't fall off. They stay healthy throughout the year, and they pretty much look the same throughout the year. So when you're driving around the greater Vancouver area, you will see tall pine trees throughout the year. Like, it just doesn't change. And that's because pine is one of the softwoods. So as we are seeing, this trend is going downward, and BC had elections, I think end of 2024, or maybe beginning of 2025. So it's been about a year, and we are seeing a pretty decided decline, right? So again, going back to two primary reasons: tariffs and slower permitting processes. Let me go to the third one for today. Let me see. Okay. Okay. There we go. So this one, right? Let me actually open this up for myself. So here in this article, this is from Business Intelligence for BC. Again, all these are in the sources, so please feel free to check them out for yourself. The US Department of Commerce hiked the anti-dumping rate to 20.56%, up from 7.66% set 3 years ago. So what's been happening for a long time is that softwood is actually a contentious point between Canada and US, right? So tariffs have pretty much always been there on Canadian lumber in some form or the other, right? The difference though is it's literally been almost but it's been hiked 2.5 times, right? So 7.66% was 3 years ago. 3 years ago, as in, I guess you're getting into the 2023, or, well, this is July 28, 2025. So you're looking at 2022. And of course, last year again, tariffs, so 20.56. Now, another point to note here is, but even before the new duties, BC's forestry sector was in a crisis. I can actually vouch for this. I've had the privilege of working closely in this industry, and what happened around 2023, 2024 was the rules and regulations got changed on how the lumber companies were allowed to cut down the trees for harvesting and then converting to finished product. So the way this works is you don't just cut and forget about it. There are two ways in which you get a license to be able to cut trees, right? Either you rent it. If you rent the space, then the government replants stuff. But there are restrictions on how much you can cut, right? If you buy a piece of land where it's, if you can use it for commercial lumber, then you take on that responsibility, right? In the parlance of the lumber industry, this is called silviculture management, right? So, long story short, you literally almost have to plant more than you actually cut in a year. Now, when the rules got changed, it became even worse. They had to do even more to try and keep all the keep all the green cover intact. Furthermore, what has happened is the permitting process is taking longer because, well, the government in Canada just keeps getting bigger. It's getting smaller now, but I'm thinking from a 3 years ago perspective, when we were seeing statistics where most of the jobs being added in the job market were actually from the government, and one of these ministries is lumber management. I don't know what it's officially called. So when you have, and this, let's understand the chain of events, right? You have a lot of people coming into the country to the point that even though your total GDP is going up, your per capita is actually going down slightly or just staying about constant, but a slight dip, right? Now, economy is tanking because inflation is up. You're paying your dues for distributing all the free money during COVID. As a result, interest rates are high, cost of borrowing is high for private companies, jobs are not getting created. So to try and buttress that, the government is hiring more and more people. When you hire these more and more people, they gotta have to bloody do something, right? So yeah, I guess some of these people were involved in making it more difficult to get, harvesting permits. Now, what has also happened is the whole land of the province is divided into zones. So in some zones you can cut trees, in some zones you can't. Now, when the rule change happened 2 years ago in 2023, 2024 odd, more of the areas which were allowed to be cut, more land was rezoned into protected land, essentially. And so now you're seeing 2-3 effects simultaneously impacting the lumber industry even before the tariffs became 21% roughly, right? You have high cost of capital, so you can't borrow, which means you can't even hire people. Maybe you're even firing people, right? On the other side, you have lesser land from which you can harvest. And then the land on which you can harvest, you just have to do even more to be in compliance with the regrowth that is required. Overall, since about 2023, a lot of the big Canadian lumber companies actually moved their operations big time to the US. Look at companies like Hanfor, Interfor, Western Fraser. These are huge Canadian companies, and they have a huge presence in the States as well. And they had to literally start relying on their US sawmills. Sawmills is where all the harvested lumber gets converted to finished products. You typically want your sawmill close to where you're harvesting, otherwise the logistics are going to get insane. So a lot of big Canadian companies had to start relying on their US operations, and they literally just either cut down production in the BC sawmills or even shut them down. I don't know the exact specifics on who did what, but this is the whole story. So you have an industry that is already suffering, And then again, tariffs happen and the rest is history, right? Now, the industry has blamed various BC&DP policies, including new old growth logging deferrals, expanded protection areas, a lack of available timber supply, and extraordinary long permitting delay. Yeah, these are the things I just explained to all of you. But again, this article says it. I just decided to, give you a more deeper explanation on why, the lumber industry was already facing, you can call it a trifecta of issues, and now there's a fourth one in the mix. So I wanna go to the last one for today, and then it'll just be a monologue from there on. But let's go here, and this is a report from Deloitte, and it's saying that weak economic growth forecast for BC in 2026. Growth remains stunted by US tariffs on forestry sectors, says audit and tax firm. See, when a big four says something, I'll take it seriously. Are they always right? No, but they do their research. I'll put it that way. I know there have been cases, okay, AI and whatnot, but there are safeguards around this kind of stuff nowadays. So I'm not saying some nonsense can't happen, but it's usually when such public reports are released, they are vetted quite a bit. So let's go over this real quick. BC's GDP forecast is to increase 1.6% this year, which basically means in real terms it's bullshit. Because if our inflation is about 2% and you increase 1.6%, then it's nothing. Now I'm not sure if this is already adjusted for real terms or is this nominal. Again, not sure. But the anemic growth tied directly to the crushing tariffs being faced by the province's forestry sector. Now, again, tariffs is one part of this equation, but the other part is, you're still facing a housing shortage. You still, there are a lot of projects going up. There is probably scope for a few more, because I keep getting these pre-sale ads and all the throw down 10,000 right now, and in 2028 you will have a beautiful condo. So building is happening still, right? The problem is the Canadian zoning laws are absolute crap. I'm going to repeat that. By the way, guys, I'm not going to go over this entire article. Again, it's been the sources, so please go ahead and read it. But the hits to the industry have been compounded by US duties on softwood. Fine. This is the Deloitte report. You'll get a link to it directly in the article. So if you feel like reading it, go for it. It also said in the province such as North Coast, both on a federal fast track, set BC up for an improved outlook in future years. Of course, you can't just build an LNG terminal in 6 months. Again, I've worked in oil and gas, specifically in NGL and LNG. So, yeah, it's about a 2 to 3 year runway at the minimum. So, again, some rosy words about the future. But overall, if you guys want to read this, go ahead. You'll find that in the sources. I am just gonna speak to you guys directly for pretty much the rest of it. Now, the problem is, again, that's why I started this session by saying that, okay, this is gonna be a continuation of Make Economics First again. And I may just create a playlist, literally with that tag, so that you can watch these two videos one after the other. So that it makes sense, right? And again, you see this Deloitte article. I just saw this, right? Canfor had to close a mill sometime, maybe last year or this year. So Canfor is a big name in the lumber world, by the way, especially in Canada and even in the States, I would assume. And if Canfor is having to close mills, then, Houston, we have a problem, or Ottawa, we have a problem. Now, the reason it's not fair to just dump everything on the tariffs and say that, okay, we, just the tariffs have become like a get out of jail free card for all the problems Canada is facing these days. And that's simply not true. On one front, which was lack of diversification, things have already started. On the second front, the provinces don't have a free trade agreement among themselves. I've said this in other lives that it literally became easier to trade with the US states under NAFTA, under all the exemptions of NAFTA, than to actually trade among the Canadian provinces. That's a big part of the dependence that got created. That's a big reason for that, right? If we have to make economics first again, we have to put aside all these, frankly speaking, quite dumb differences among the provinces and just put Canada up front and center, right? If you don't do that, you will see some recovery, but it'll be minuscule at best and most likely not even keep up with the inflation, right? The federal government can only do so many things externally. They can get you a deal with China. They'll probably get you a deal with India. They'll get you a deal with the EU. They'll probably get you a deal with the UK. But if we don't do our own cleanup in-house, none of that is going to matter. Getting a trade deal is just saying that if the other country wants to buy something from us and it's in one of those categories that have been agreed on the trade deal, then there'll be either a reduced tariff or a zero tariff, and vice versa, right? If you want to buy something from the other country, if it falls in one of those categories negotiated in the trade deal, then we'll have to pay lesser for it. But that won't matter. None of that would bloody matter if there are not enough Canadian businesses to buy from the other countries or to sell to those other countries, right? So we go back to this theme of making Canada more business friendly. Till we don't get our act together on that, all these trade deals will mean almost nothing. And I will repeat that these trade deals will mean nothing. The number of choices in Canada are so regulated on all fronts that we are literally in the Stone Age when it comes to, something like telecom plans. We are paying draconian rates for data. 100 GB data, $60 a month. That's after a goddamn discount. Otherwise, it would be 120. Sure, it has CAN, USA, Mexico, so fine. But I won't tell you who the carrier is. But I kid you not, guys, like when I moved to Canada, I used to pay $35 for a 10 GB data plan. Let that sink in. $35 for a 10 GB data plan. Eventually, I was able to bump that up to 30 GB for $35, which was reasonable considering, Canadian plans. But then I look at the plans in the US and it's like 40, 50 USD, unlimited data, 5G plus, right? And you want a US Canada plan? Fine, $80. Come on, guys. It's true that we basically end up earning Mississippi salaries and pay California prices for everything, just because everything in Canada is basically a control monopoly. I'm not going to get into supply control and supply management and how that's the most horrifying thing that can exist in 21st century. Maybe I'll do a live on the Austrian School of Economics and how that's the only one that makes any bloody sense. But yeah, I'll leave you guys with this thought, right? Making economics first again is not about figuring out how we can trade more. That's one part of it. The other part of it is how do we make business easy within Canada so that at least Canadians get the maximum benefit of the resources that the country has an abundance of. Why can't we change our zoning laws to allow every family to have a single family home? 42 million people, that's it, guys. That's not that many. 42 million divided by 4. I like numbers, so I'm going to give this a shot. Divided by, average family size, 4 people. That's 11 million, 10.5 million single family homes to, roughly speaking, to house all the families in Canada in their own home, not condos. But no, zoning laws. See, I'm okay with wanting to preserve nature. I have nothing against it. But then you have to understand the flip side, that you just can't let people in like popcorn. You let people in, they're gonna want to stay somewhere. Right? You can't I know this one saying in Hindi. I'm trying to think of it can't always be heads I win, tails you lose, right? You're gonna pay for poor decisions sometime. You print a ton of money for free, maybe more than what was needed, you get high inflation. You bring in a lot of people, wages go down. Prices go up, on the other hand. And that's why you end up with Mississippi salaries and California prices. Anyway, guys, I guess this became a little bit of a rant, but I just wanted to talk about BC's lumber industry because this is one of the big ones in the area. And seeing it suffer when it doesn't really have to. A lot of this could be fixed just by fixing Canadian laws, even before you have to think about all the US tariffs. It's pretty mind-boggling that we are not seeing too much action on that. We are seeing a lot of action on the foreign front. We are not seeing enough action on the internal front in that sense. So, yeah. What do you guys think about this? What do you guys think about my analysis? What do you guys think about the whole problem in BC? Please feel free to comment, do like, share, and subscribe. And please, take our voice to the world. Thank you and have a great rest of the day wherever you are. Ciao, ciao.